Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Gooey's Dungeon Dive, the show where I go through all of the dungeons in the Legend of Zelda series. And I'm joined, as always, by my Wind Waker correspondent, Corey Richmond. How's it going, Corey?
Bada bing, bada boom.
All right. After returning below the surface of the Great Sea with Tetra, in the Master Sword Chamber, we finally get the full scoop from none other than the King. Can you pronounce this guy's full name?
Daphnis No Hansen Hyrule.
Who also happens to be the King of Red Lions. He tells Link and Tetra the tale of the gods flooding Hyrule during Ganon's last attack that we kind of got in the opening credits of this game. But not only that, he explains Tetra's pirate charm that is actually made from royal gossip stones that the king himself created. And her golden necklace that was given to her by her mother is actually a piece of the Triforce of Wisdom. It is then that he reveals her true purpose, that is protecting the Triforce of Wisdom as the true heir to the royal bloodline, making her Princess Zelda. Whoa!
Something that I think this game really excels at, amongst many other things this game really excels at, are all of the cutscenes I think are top notch. Just the way that they do like the cinematography and like the different kinds of camera pans and the cuts and the different angles and stuff like that. That shot of the Triforce spinning together right in front of that close-up of Tetra's face, and it plays the little A Link to the Past intro tune, another little callback there. It's just so well done, and it gives me stuff like that gives me chills every time. And even little details like when the king is talking about how the kingdom almost fell to the shadow, and then it just casually slowly pans over to the stained glass artwork of Ganon. It's just tying in the small lore details with Ocarina of Time and fantastic direction just really, in my opinion, make the cutscenes of this game. These are worth like a watch if you haven't ever paid attention to them.
We have brought up a lot that it's, building off of Ocarina of Time, but you made a good point with the Triforce. Like, there are little moments, some of them are also in Ocarina of Time, but that originate from or are only in A Link to the Past. And, it's got kind of the whole legacy in mind, I feel like.
This is kind of a strong suit of the game's story in itself, but that it obviously plays off of Ocarina of Time being sort of a spiritual successor to that, but it doesn't really drive it over the head with a baseball bat that this is a sequel to the events of Ocarina of Time. Like, even some of the references are somewhat more subdued, and the events that we learn of that happen in the past, you can connect the dots yourself that they're related to Ocarina of Time without the king having to be like, hey, this literally happened before with a different hero and stuff.
A lot of what he tells us has either been built to really well. The charm and the Triforce necklace, for example, that is kind of a big reveal, but it's not like it doesn't take much to explain it. Like, we've seen all the evidence, and then it's like, it feels like a natural reveal. And then stuff like the backstory that he tells, we already know from the beginning of the game, and then he kind of pushes it forward a little bit. He gives us a little bit of new information about what the logic was of doing that whole plan and everything. Zelda has to stay behind, hidden in the chamber, as it's still kind of a secret to Ganondorf. Then we got to return to the surface and try to bring power back to the Master Sword, something the king did not predict. So he tells us a little something must have happened to the sages who gave the blade its power, and we have to visit their respective temples to kind of repower it up so we can actually take on Ganondorf. That barrier that was outside of Hyrule Castle underwater was actually created by Ganondorf's magic, and it's preventing us from accessing the other temples. So we have to find their other alternative entrances atop the Great Sea.
That's something I didn't even notice until this time around, is that he specifically mentions, oh, there's some entrances down here, but we can't get to them. I like that. I kind of like that they included that, even though, we don't really hear or see anything of these other entrances ever again in the rest of the game, but I do like that he's kind of like, all right, we gotta go for plan B. We gotta go for the mountaintop entrances that are above the sea still.
It's obviously a gameplay thing,
Yeah.
It's not about exploring the underworld. But too, it also kind of, things make sense there story-wise, because Ganondorf was able to, kind of gain access down there. He's able to get the jump on these next temples, which we'll see in both of them. They have, some of his, enemies and stuff, so it kind of makes sense for he's infiltrated them and now we're busting in from the top. So we're out here, we're in the overworld. There is a lot of things that we can't get to all of the stuff that there is to do. I think we've established there are a lot of things that you can do in the Great Sea, but there's even newer stuff here. There's more great fairies we can uncover. There's a bunch of side quests on Windfall Island, and like I said, all the stuff we missed earlier.
It's funny because, in preparation for recording for this episode, I was almost worried, I don't know if I'm gonna get to our checkpoint in time, because I was just doing so much other stuff that I hadn't progressed the main story yet. So
there's one big diversion I feel like we can do before the next dungeon. That is continuing the ongoing searches for the pieces of the Triforce. We've had this quest, hinted multiple times before in the game, but now the king kind of more directly speaks to us about the Triforce of Courage and how it's been split into many shards. It's not fully elucidated, but he says we should seek them out, and luckily not long after we get a pretty expensive gift in the mail from Tingle, which is a chart that shows the locations of the Triforce charts and shards in the overworld.
A gift that you're required to purchase.
And it's quite a bit of rupees. We'll talk more about the Triforce quest later, but you can do a lot more, and I just wanted to say that after we progress a little bit in the story before the next dungeon in this segment of the game, I picked up a few more pieces of the Triforce, and by this point in the game, by the time I reached our next big destination, the next big dungeon, I think I had all but 2 Triforce shards collected.
I think it's funny, because looking back, people might say oh, it's kind of just all thrown at you, lumped at you right at the very end. But besides the fact that you have the freedom to do this if you know that you can do it, just this playthrough has reinforced that you're either hinted at or explicitly told, hey, you can go do this well before you actually need to.
I think that all was set up pretty well, and one other aspect that I think that was set up really well is this whole next section that we have to complete in the game. So basically the 2 temples we have to get to free the sages or figure out what's going on with them. They're both marked on our map, and they're 2 islands that we've been able to approach for a while now in the game, but we've lacked the ability to enter. We've got Gale Island, which is behind this powerful gust that's blowing out, so we can't approach it, and the other is on Headstone Island. The temple entrance is underneath a giant headstone, believe it or not. At both the islands we can get a hint from the fishmen about where to locate the items required to enter the dungeon, but that of course leads us to the Fire and Ice Islands, which we are unable to approach. We've talked about some of them before, but one's a big volcano, one's got this icy wind, it's too hot, too cold to get near them. And at those islands, we remember way back from when we first started sailing, I think our second sailing episode, we can get a fishman hint at both of those islands. He tells us of great fairy magic we need to enter each island, and that leads to the mysterious location that we could only access via warp point earlier, which turns out to be the Great Fairy Island. You get to meet the Queen of the Great Fairies, who gives the ability to add fire or ice to our arrows.
The Fairy Queen is awesome. She rocks, and her theme is fantastic.
The remixed version of the fairy theme, very good.
Yeah, I always thought she was very spooky and very cute, and I like that she hits on Link.
And that lets us, for the volcano island, we can freeze it and get close to the island. And over on the ice island, we can shoot the flame arrow in. And it allows us to melt the ice, freeze the volcano, blocking us on either respective islands. And then you get a little time challenge where you have to either slip around on the ice ring island or climb into the fire mountain. And you get to obtain the items needed to approach both dungeons, which are the power bracelets, allowing you to lift up the headstone, or the iron boots, allowing you to walk through the gust. So we can bypass both those obstacles and get to the actual entrances of both the earth and wind temples. So I just wanted to say, like, all these locations have been set up, I think, really well, and like the hints for them we've had like right in front of our face the whole time, and now it's like, I think it's pretty cool. Like, once you get to here, it's like, okay, I can it's finally time,
That is something that's really cool, because you can, if you kind of break down like the succession of when you're discovering or unlocking this stuff, you can either do it in the order that you just described it, where it's like, you go to the locations marked on the map, you go to the islands and realize you can't get to them, and then you go to Mother and Child Isle, or just out of pure exploration, you could go to Mother and Child Isle, get the arrows, and then make the connection in your head because you've already been exposed to those islands and be like, oh, now I can go do those islands. And then once you get the items from those islands, you can be like, oh, now I can go to those dungeon entrances that I couldn't get to before. It's kind of cool that you can kind of discover them in a reverse order. Discover and do them in a reverse order depending on what you have and haven't seen in the game.
Inside both of the islands, we find these large stone tablets with musical notation inscribed on them. And when we conduct the songs written on them, we meet both the Zora sage La Ruta and the Kokiri sage Fado. And it seems that Ganondorf did in fact make his way to both the temples and, quote unquote, stole the souls of both the sages. And now
stole them good.
He killed them. That's what happened. He killed them. They're ghosts now, and they need someone else to take their place in the temples, praying to the gods to grant power to the Master Sword. These are both very cool scenes, by the way. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, another example of top-tier scenes in this game.
We must find those who carry their bloodline and hold their instruments to conduct them in the songs that the sages teach us, which are the Earth God's lyric and the Wind God's aria. These songs are meant to awaken the sages to their ultimate destiny. Very cool vibes in both of them. We're almost doing a disservice by combining them both, but they both have their own like cool theme.
I think they're both remixes of like the Legendary Hero theme.
Although we could approach, both these dungeons in any order, from here we can only find one sage at a time. So while we could meet both the sages and you could have an idea about who's who, only one really is active available at this moment. So the first one, we get the hint with Laruto and the harp. If you can't remember who holds the harp instrument, Laruto shows us. Luckily, when you're at the base of Dragon Roost Island, you now hear some beautiful harp music playing. I love that. I think that's a very nice little touch.
That's something I kind of want to touch on too, right before we move on, is like we're talking about the way the game delivers hints and the way that you're told to progress in a certain way. A lot of games in the future tend to go the more hand-holdy route of you need to go to this point or you need to go over here. This game tells you, okay, you need to find the person that has this instrument. So you can either, one, remember who has that instrument and know that it's Medley, or two, you can make the little lore connection thing that like the Zoras are kind of connected to the Rito and be like, alright, maybe I should check out Dragon Roost Island and find it that way. Or you could just naturally stumble upon Dragon Roost Island and, like you said, hear the harp and be like, yeah, well, that's probably a good indication.
It's interesting you say that now, like that you can make the lore connections. You couldn't before this. Like, it's literally this moment that people make the lore connections of the Zora and Rito. That was an interesting discussion for a while. I guess it's still talked about, but it's very interesting. You get the Kokiri to Korok, it seems a little bit more of a natural progression.
I was kind of making that connection with both of them because I was thinking the same thing for Fado, because you see Fado and at that point you've already learned from Kokiri like they used to live in the forest, and you can see the Kokiri houses and stuff.
That might actually be like confusing for some people. Like, am I supposed to go back to Jaboon?
Yeah.
Like, who do I
yeah,
talk
he
to?
knows. He'll tell you.
So yeah, you can go up and you can find Medley. There's some nice little characterization here. She's kind of got this proud sort of motherly bond to Prince Kamali, who's kind of doing better. So it's nice to check back in. When we conduct her in the Earth God's lyric, we get, I think, a very beautiful scene with her and Laruto where they play together. And it awakens Medley to her purpose, and it gives her a new sense of purpose, but also I like this bit of sadness that she has, because she now has to like leave behind Prince Kamali to fulfill her role in the Earth Temple, which might ultimately be, you're committing basically to being down there alone forever, it seems. So I don't know, I like her story kind of parallels Link a little bit too.
Once again, this section of the game just absolutely smashing it with sick cutscenes. This is another great one. Yeah. I love that, she gets the like look in her eye and then faints, and then it immediately cuts to black, and you have this nice sort of like, floating in the ether teaching thing where you can see the emotions coming from this character. And I agree with what you're saying, that we get a lot of characterization out of Medley just in this scene alone. Once again, once she wakes up, that's accompanied by a nice slow little remix of Dragon Roost Island, and you can see Komali flying above, and he's just a little too late to go meet them because they disappear and they're ready to go off to their next destination.
From here we can go play the song and actually enter the Earth Temple. So I think we're gonna call it for today. But yeah, this is a pretty fun section of the game. Like I said, I did a lot more than we talked about, and so I'm having fun sailing around on the sea and doing all that stuff.
The Ice Ring Isle and the, I think, Fire Mountain or Fire Island, whatever it's called, that's something that's interesting to point out, because I think this is one segment of the game where, while it does crush it with awesome cutscenes, it does, when you're going through those, feel a little bit like they definitely had ideas that they didn't get to implement fully. This, I think, is one of the biggest examples in the game where you can maybe feel like if they had more time, they probably could have put more stuff in here. Because Ice Ring Isle, and even though the Fire one is similar to Dragon Roost, they both feel like they have their own full identities, and I think naturally people would want full dungeons or even mini dungeons out of them, and instead we just kind of get these one-off rooms, which is still cool.
Met
but
on your journey and seeing like kind of how they've progressed. Well, I'll say here's where I thought of that. It was, and even in with the Laruto connection, and I was sort of thinking one aspect I liked about this was similar to Ocarina of Time, like reuniting with characters who you previously met on your journey and seeing like kind of how they've progressed, and now you have a bond to them, and even in Medley's case, like some of their storyline parallels yours in a lot of ways. I think that's really cool. But I was thinking about how there's definitely more characterization to these characters, but there are more characters in Ocarina of Time. And I was sort of thinking about how, it would have been cool if there was a third, section, like a Zora or Jaboon or whatever. And that's why I was thinking maybe Laruto was supposed to like connect to, a different character or something. Maybe not, maybe that's how they intended it, but I was partially thinking it would have been cool if there was like, we got that dungeon that we missed on Great Fish Island, and we had another dungeon. I don't want to go too far into, the rest of the game, but, maybe another dungeon there or something like. And I was thinking about that in some of those gameplay elements we've mentioned. Like, I feel like there are times where I'm like, oh, there should have been more. There's definitely more
to it, yeah.
To it that they want to get to.
It's just want more. I just want more Wind Waker,
Let's get out of here. We'll get to the Earth Temple in our next episode. Thanks everyone for watching.